but that's super loud. And then we looked up and there was a dot in the sky. And then instantly, the same second, that dot was in the yard in front of where we were. So I was always like, can I tell the class about the UFO that I saw? And it was kind of just like pulsing on top of that shed. Um, Talk about timelines, talk about dimensions, talk about, the shifting of consciousness and the stuff that I actually really care about. If you're a truth seeker, you have to keep seeking. You can't just become like, I know. But some of the things that I feel like have come up so consistently that I feel, at least for now, that these are good like explanations or words for it, and that there's an ability for consciousness to come into it, and that there's some type of higher consciousness controlling these things. Now, what's behind that? It could be other great aliens. It could be any type of species of aliens. It could be some type of interdimensional being.
The following is a conversation with Jennifer Carmody. Jennifer, also known as JK Ultra, is a multi-talented creator pushing the boundaries of what's possible on TikTok. With over 650,000 followers and an astonishing 1 billion views, she captivates audiences with thought-provoking videos on conspiracy theories, metaphysics, spirituality, and aliens. Jennifer's reach extends way beyond TikTok, as she's been featured in the LA Times article for her unique citizen journalism coverage of the Harvey Weinstein trial. Jennifer's been interviewed by some of the top figures in the UFO field. In this conversation, Jennifer shares her own UFO encounter with Tom and I, as well as her thoughts on where disclosure is going, what the phenomenon could represent, and her hypothesis on the current state of UFO secrecy. An easy conversationalist, fun, informative, and an all-round asset to the UFO field. So, the following is a conversation with Jennifer Carmody. What first piqued your interest in the UFO kind of UAP subject specifically? Where did that kind of start?
So for me, actually, it started at a very young age because I had a UFO encounter with my whole family in 1993 when I was 5 years old. So it was something that I was always interested in from that point. Obviously, the years following it, you're 5 years old, those couple years following it, I was excited and intrigued by it, but also terrified when it was time to go to bed, because then you're just afraid that it's like coming back. So my experience has always been, even since, first grade around that time, I was always like, can I tell the class about the UFO that I saw? Like we had journal entries in school. So it was something that was always a part of my life in that way. The spirituality and kind of the conspiracy side of things, that came more in like adulthood because I was a bit afraid of spirituality side of things when I was growing up. And so my introduction, though, was more so from like aliens, abductions, UFOs. That was the initial interest.
Oh, fantastic. Are you comfortable talking about your experience, about your
Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, these things there's so many little details, but like a abridged version is basically, it was in 1993. It was probably, I would assume, around June because I know school had ended, but it was before the 4th of July that year. And basically, I have a lot of siblings and step siblings and half siblings. So we were all one of the first days of summer hanging out in the backyard at my dad's house. And me and my brother, who are the younger ones, were off to the side on like a swing set. And then all of the older sisters, which were about like 14 to 10, 11 years old in that age range, they were playing on another side, just like hanging out and talking. And they start freaking out because they see a white dove fly over them. And this like area, Jersey City, is a very urban area. There's not really like wildlife. It could have been an albino pigeon, but still, even at 11 o'clock at night, you don't typically see those flying over you. So they're like, oh my God, a white dove flew over us. And so me and my brother come over and we're like, oh, we're going to wait for the bird to come back. And then pretty much that instant feels like 1 second, but it's broken up into many different parts. But the way that I remembered it is it just feels like it all happened at once. And that was when we heard a sound, and the sound was kind of like a bat swinging when it's like a whoosh, but like a kind of whistle sound, like that kind of high pitched air breaking. but that's super loud. And then we looked up and there was a dot in the sky. And then instantly, the same second, that dot was in the yard in front of where we were. So next to us, but the way we were all facing was facing towards that yard. And it was like there was a big shed that was built in the backyard, and it was kind of just like pulsing on top of that shed. And then I remember that my dad's dog went in front of us and she started barking at it. And I looked at her and I just remembered like the long shadow getting casted behind her. So it was just like a long shadow. And then the next thing that I remembered was we were all standing in a line, basically like about a foot in front of where we were just sitting. And then that was when everyone kind of like seemed to like unfreeze and freak out and scream. And we're like, trying to break the door down, trampling each other, trying to get back into the house. But then, what's been interesting with that is that the story has evolved. That was my full in the physical remembrance of it for like 25 years. And then in my 30s, then I did a hypnosis where then over the course of from 2021 to just last year, I had done 3 hypnosis sessions and retrieved more information about it. But that's also what's a bit crazy because I've had this experience for 25 years that all my siblings have the same story. But then going under hypnosis, you get more details and more information.
Incredible. Have you?
That's amazing.
I was just going to say, did you have do you have conversations with them sort of as you've grown up? Have you talked about it more recently and their kind of memory of it?
Yeah, so we didn't talk about it much at the time. Like I feel like after it happened, it kind of, but I guess that's like kind of typical with like siblings if anything happens, it's kind of just like 20 years pass and you don't talk about it really. I would say within the last, 10 years, it had come up a few times and we all kind of have the same details. And then recently, now that I've like posted about it and done like different things talking about it, we've talked about it again. And so, like, kind of the biggest details is one of my sisters remembers the sound differently. She remembers it more like a boom, like a huge boom, where I heard that whoosh type of air breaking sound. And then my other sister recently had told me, I guess she had seen my video on it, and she said that she's like, well, you missed this one detail. And she said that there was basically like a shadow figure that was there during that time that she says was there from the time of the dove to the UFO. And she said, like, that was kind of the first time talking about that detail. So she said, when she was younger, she thought that it was like the neighbor in their yard. But like thinking back, she's like, I mean, I also did know it was not the neighbor, but I kind of like rationalized to myself and then never really talked about that detail. But so that was interesting too, that I don't have any remembrance of any other figure being there.
That's awesome. Do you think that the dove itself was what they call an apport, where it's like a physical manifestation to get your attention kind of thing?
Interesting. So, at the time I didn't know about any of that stuff. And then as my like UFO research, they have also talk about like the screen memories as well,
Yeah.
where they kind of put it in your mind that this
Mm.
happened as like a kind of breaking of that was one of the things that had interested Linda Moulton Howe in my story too, was kind of this white bird, even though a lot of times it'll be a owl. But Yvonne Smith has talked about that it's been horses, uh, giant rats. Like there's a lot of times a giant white moth. So it could be a lot of different white animals after like I've done investigation to it as an adult. What's crazy is I had done a second hypnosis with Sarah Brexman Cosme, who, she's continuing on Dolores Cannon's work. And
Mhm.
in that, they said that they had exchanged my soul. And then about a week later, I was in Costa Rica for an ayahuasca ceremony. And during that ayahuasca ceremony, I communed with the original soul that was in my body. And it told me basically that, and this was the first time I've ever heard this in any of the UFO type of stuff. I've never heard it in anyone else's story, was that the white dove was actually my original soul. it was like a manifestation of my original soul leaving that life. And that's why I didn't see it, but the other people in my family saw it. And then the other crazy detail, which is we all kind of like felt like there was someone else there. We all felt
Hmm.
like, who was that other person? So then after that information, I came back from my ayahuasca ceremony and I had posted about it. And some people had DM'd me and they were like, do you think that's why your whole family feels like there was someone there and nobody understands who the other person was? Because it kind of was a different soul.
Mm.
So it's kind of like that's the thing is my original experience in the physical is very kind of now that I know this stuff standard for these type of UFO abduction experiences. But then all the stuff that kind of happened in hypnosis after that kind of goes beyond some people's level of belief. You know, there's like groups of the UFO people who kind of stick to this like physical 3D research. And then this is where you start getting into you know, some of the other stuff. Whitley Strieber has talked a lot about that there's,
Yeah.
and even Linda Moulton Howe, how like souls are kind of some motivation in what's happening.
Hmm. So why do you think that we aren't talking about the consciousness side of things with UAP then? Because it's such a massive part of it. I mean, Bob Lazar's flying saucer didn't have any control surfaces, and people talk about that that's the means of communication and interaction. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's kind of, I think it's changing, but I think a big part of the reason is the people who really were the trailblazers in this, you know, people like Linda Moulton Howe or Richard Dolan or Stephen Greer, all of these icons who really made this what it is today, they had to be pretty secretive about their own experiences. I do know from like talking to them that like pretty much all of the people in this situation have had maybe some type of out of body or some type of experience, but they were so worried about not being taken seriously if they had anything, either psychedelic related or through dream state or through meditation
Hmm.
or even an abduction themselves. You know, there's even stories too about all of these like whistleblowers and other people who've come forward, even not whistleblowers themselves, but the people who are kind of adjacent, people like the Christopher Mellons and those people. Almost all of them, when people have talked to them privately, they do have experiences too. So, you know, I think that it's kind of the stigma of not wanting to be crazy. But I think
Hmm.
that most people who, unless they're on the debunker side, because there is the whole debunker community of the UFO thing. But if you're not on the debunker side, they probably have all had those experiences, but are afraid of, you know, looking crazy. So now it's like, you know, us and the younger generation, we could just talk about it, you know, like I'm not going to be worried about someone thinking I'm crazy because I had a UFO experience. You know, I'm not too concerned about it.
How did you come into the kind of putting this online and being, you know, you've got several different platforms where you discuss, you know, these subjects and kind of similar related kind of subjects. How did that kind of start? Because you know, it's one thing having experience and talking to people when you know that they've got an interest and you can kind of test the water, but it's another thing kind of putting yourself out there, like kind of like we do, I guess, but putting yourself out there and discussing it really openly. How did that kind of come about?
So it was really by accident, honestly. That is the kind of crazy way. I had a lot of changes in my life. I had gone through a crazy breakup, had all this stuff. Like it was kind of like everything in my life kind of was in a weird tower moment in like, you know, the tower card moment. It was like everything had crashed down. And then randomly in that time, you know, I was talking with a couple of my girlfriends and we just thought it would be hilarious to get TikToks. We just were cracking up and we were like, you know what? We missed Bitcoin. We missed this. We missed this. We missed this. We've never gotten in early on anything in our whole lives. And we were kind of just like joking about how we've missed every big thing or came in too early before it was hot or like, you know, and it was just jokingly. So we just all thought it would be hilarious if we made TikToks. And then we were like, okay, let's do a TikTok challenge and hold ourselves accountable and post for 30 days straight. And so, you know, one of my friends, she does more like shamanism. Another friend, she does like interior design. So it wasn't like we were all in the same space. And I was like, well, I guess, you know, if I was going to do this, I would do like conspiracy school, you know? And so my first video, I was like, I'm going to post about Ghislaine Maxwell and
Hmm.
how she actually had this secret Reddit account. And, it's a juicy little Reddit conspiracy, and it went viral. And then I was like, oh, you like that? Oh, I've got more up my sleeve. So then, like, the next day, I went to the In-N-Out burger that Ghislaine Maxwell was spotted at, and I kind of got into that. Then I went to Brittany, and also because I live in LA, I'm kind of like very central to these things. So then I went to the Brittany Murphy house and did a Brittany Murphy series just for like 1 second in front of the construction site because they've knocked it down. But and then just from there, it was kind of like, oh, those 30 days I was just putting out like whatever type of content. And then it turned into my Apocalypse series, which the Apocalypse series really blew up because I didn't realize how the apocalypse really just crosses every community. Every group of people care about this, every religion, every country, everyone is very invested in this topic. And I didn't grow up kind of with like the concept of the rapture and stuff. So I didn't realize the intensity of the reaction that I was going to get, because I was like, oh, these are my cool like things that Nostradamus stuff that I'm interested in. And it was like every religion, every group, the doomsdayers, the conspiracy theorists. And then, so then it blew up. That was all within the first 30 days of me posting on the TikTok. And by that point, I had almost like 200,000 followers from that month of just pouring out all of these conspiracies, and me thinking I found out who the Antichrist was, and going through like how that freaked me out, because then what do you do if you know who the Antichrist is? How do you proceed living on in this world? So then I kind of shifted more towards the spirituality. I kind of also because I am a spiritual person, in reflection and meditation, I kind of got the message that like, okay, well, now that everybody's looking because they care about, the Antichrist and the mark of the beast and all this other negative, crazy stuff, talk about timelines, talk about dimensions, talk about, the shifting of consciousness and the stuff that I actually really care about. And so it was kind of like the perfect storm, because everyone was looking, and all that apocalypse stuff actually does really perfectly align with like humanity's evolution. So then it became more towards, and then I poured all out, and then it evolved. Then I started kind of meeting different people and interviewing them and kind of being a little bit more in flow about what I'm even doing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
You can see that you touch on so many different subjects, and for me, it would be so difficult to try and stay. I mean, it's difficult just for one subject because there's so many different elements of like ufology, and there's disclosure side of it. There's the people coming out as whistleblowers. There's the historic stuff. There's the vintage footage and videos, and just so many different kind of directions to go. It's hard to kind of stay focused, but to have that as well as lots of different different kind of subjects. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you do it. It's yeah. So if it's okay, just coming back to kind of the UFO subject specifically, do you have a take on, and I know I do ask people this question, I know it's very speculative, but do you have a take on what it represents, what specifically we're seeing UFOs, what you saw when you were 5 years old, and what other people are seeing? Do you have a take on what that is? Obviously, there's discussion of extraterrestrial or interdimensional, intradimensional, all the different kind of theories. What's your kind of take on that?
So I think it's possible that it's a lot of things and that it's more than just one. Because even another aspect too is how much of this is government just secret programs too. I'm not super into the like My Labs thing where people say that they're getting abducted by government programs. I'm not saying that I don't believe that that happens. I do think it happens, but I think that that's only happening to people that are in deep levels of the military, maybe having some programs or something run on them. But I feel like that aspect is probably not what's happening to the general public, because in the general public, these things, sometimes the people are being lifted out of their bedroom. They're having these crazy spiritual experiences with it. So I think a lot of things are happening, and I wouldn't completely rule out that some of this is like secret ops programs. But those I think aren't really happening to average people. Those are like the government whistleblower type people, could be part of some type of misinformation or disinformation. But I do believe that And of course, I'm always down to like be having my perception evolve. I think that that's like important in all of this because if you're a truth seeker, you have to keep seeking. You can't just become like, I know. But some of the things that I feel like have come up so consistently that I feel, at least for now, that these are good like explanations or words for it. I do believe in the gray aliens doing these abductions. I do believe that they're probably some type of half android, half organic, inorganic being, and that there's an ability for consciousness to come into it, and that there's some type of higher consciousness controlling these things. Now, what's behind that? It could be other gray aliens. It could be any type of species of aliens. It could be some type of interdimensional being. So I think that there's also elements of it too, because we're seeing these UAPs, but not everybody sees them. So we know that this has to do something dimensionally because it can fly across the sky and certain people can see it and certain people can't. So that means like the visible spectrum of light in an individual person is playing a part. And then the abductions, we know that this is also something to do with the pineal gland, that there may be some type of portal through our brain, which allows us to experience other dimensions. So I feel like there's a lot of different things. I have been a believer of the more interdimensional concept in general when it comes to everything, even planets. Like I'm not as far as like saying, people say that space isn't real or things like that, but like I believe that space is probably not what we think it is. I think space is probably the same way that if someone in the second dimension was looking up into the third, they'd probably see a lot of black space because they don't have the information or the spectrum of light to see. So I do think there is interdimensional and possibly could be other planets, but are these physical planets? I don't know. I love that the conversation is going towards interdimensional because that means that we're going to be like having a new definition of reality soon in our near future.
It's a great answer. I love that. So, with that in mind, then, because everybody talks about disclosure is coming, disclosure this, and then catastrophic disclosure. What does disclosure actually mean to you? Because some people say we've already had it, and to some people, it's like a conscious raising of their awareness.
Well, I think it's kind of one of those things too, where they keep moving the goalpost, which is annoying because we probably, based on the original stuff connected to disclosure, we probably already have had kind of the original disclosure. But I feel like it's also too, it's kind of one of these things that are twofold because disclosure happens on the personal level. That is the best disclosure.
Mm,
On the personal level, there's no other way because those are the people who feel like, I don't care if there's proof. I experienced it. But then I understand the need for government disclosure. But the government has dragged their feet for so long that now personal disclosure is surpassing it. And more, and that just once again makes the government look like you can't trust it, like they're lying. And so I think it will come from the government. I don't think it's going to be a big event because I've heard kind of speculation that it could cause like a quantum explosion if
mm,
so many thousands of people's like reality breaks. And because our reality is like being formed by so many people's consciousness, if so many people were to have their reality broken kind of at the same time, it could create like a quantum explosion and be like detrimental to humanity as a whole. So I don't think it's going to be some type of Independence Day or everything we see in the movies. I think it's going to be anticlimactic where they keep like kind of half giving it. So some people say it's already happened. Some people are waiting for it. And then finally, one day they're going to say something that is actually really solid. And everyone's going to be like, didn't you do that 3 years ago? And
mm.
it's going to be like kind of like not the fun disclosure celebration that we were looking for. But that's probably the safest way because it'll happen in like this kind of slow way where people will just be like, oh, remember when people used to not believe that?
Mm. So uh, let's play the Las Vegas question then. So 5 years from now, which is kind of spitting distance in terms of how long this has been going on for, what do you think's different? Do you think we're all a new religion? Do you think we're a lot more kind of, oh, Lockheed Martin have, got this crazy machine? Where do you think things are going?
And it's so hard to say because it's kind of like, if you were to get a puppy, then it's growing right in front of your eyes so quickly, but you can't even tell. And then you look at a picture from a year ago and you're like, oh my God, you were so little and you've grown. So it's like, that's, I feel like a little bit what happens with us too, is because we're living it, we can't see the changes. But when we do look 5 years ago, say to 2017, I think about that time, or maybe actually, wait, that's way more than 5 years ago. But but even like that original New York Times article was so groundbreaking. And now we're talking about interdimensional beings. So there was this huge leap, but it kind of still feels like nothing has happened. So I feel like we have a little bit of that curse of like when a puppy's growing in front of you, you don't get to see all the stages because it's just it's too close. But at the same time, I feel like a lot did happen in those years. So we can't underestimate what is possible in 5 years. Do I think that there'll be the religion thing? I think in our pockets of the world, yes, but also religion is still so dominant of the global structure. I don't know if it'll be at that level that it'll, but in the ways that it has, like in Western culture, I think the alien creation kind of intelligent design will be replacing religion in like the Western culture.
Do you think that it's going to come from the government, or do you think it will come from kind of private, non-government organizations, Soul Foundation, Galileo Project, something like that? Where do you think it will come from?
I think it kind of has to come from the government for people to accept it. But I think probably the best way would be in some type of partnership with some type of, say, like scientific entity, like a NASA or, whatever type of telescopes or whatever they're putting up there. So I feel like that would probably be, but even that would not be the type of disclosure probably that we want, which is like, oh, this is an alien species. Those are going to probably be, which will probably be one of the stages that is going to come up soon, is like the artificial light, because they keep kind of flirting with that idea that like one of our satellites is going to see that there's artificial light, which is going to show that there's some type of civilization. And it's the same thing with like the sounds, like SETI will do stuff. So I feel like it's going to happen a lot through those, but I feel like people aren't going to really count it until it's like, the president comes out and of course, I know it's probably going to come from the US, which is because people, this is the question that I get in every single video that I do thousands of times. It's like, I want to bang myself over the head with this question is like, why does this only happen in the US? Why do people only get abducted? Which is obviously not true. You guys are in the UK, you know that there is so much stuff happening there and all over Europe and all over the world. China, Brazil, I mean, Mexico, there's so many places that are just like hotspots outside of the US. But what I think about that topic is people have to be honest about the level of control that the US has in the global chess game of everything. So any country kind of stepping on their toes is going to face some consequences of it. So I think that that's really the reason why, because that question comes up all the time. And I'm like, no, there's so many cases everywhere. The most famous cases are actually outside of the US. But I think it's that thing is it's kind of like this like government overreach, also because of our military industrial complex in the US. We have these mega, mega, mega conglomerates that have so much power over this narrative and this conversation. And I think that's what it really comes down to is this, the government, the Department of Defense, and then the private sector, all of these weapons producers. That's really what's holding back the conversation because we are having all of it come through with NASA is little bit of information, SETI, all of these things are putting out a little bit, but it's going to be until I guess they can get the funding properly to defend us against the aliens before we'll probably get a real disclosure from the government.
A great answer. So, is there any case historically, including your own, that you'd love to be able to go back and witness firsthand?
I mean, I would definitely Roswell for sure. Like, I would love to just like beam in to the farm as like I'm like, wait, what's that noise? Like how the guy goes out on like a horse and like sees that something crashed out there. Like that's like I want to like beam into like that guy's brain and see him find the, foil looking things out there.
Hmm.
That one, I mean, kind of if I could like remote view, I would go like right into Betty and Barney Hill's brain. Like I would go into pretty much all of them. Everyone that I could.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer. Well, what advice would you give, given that it's such a crazy nebulous field, and you've got things like remote viewing that are now becoming, out there. Joe McMoneagle on YouTube the other day, you're getting massive views and stuff. So it's getting in the sort of global lexicon. What advice would you give for somebody that's just starting to peek in? They've just seen it on Fox News or whatever, and they're going, "Well, go on then. What's all this about?" Where would you kind of point them?
I think, it is good to kind of know the lore if you're new to this, because the lore has basically kind of become the general consensus of the story of what happened. I mean, I did my own Alien series, which is called AD on YouTube, which I broke down basically all the mainstream stuff, the starseed stuff, so kind of different sides of it, where it's kind of your UFO side, but then also your spirituality side. I think those are kind of good places. I feel like honestly, it's the people online that have been compiling all the stuff. That's the really good spaces to find information because just by nature, the stuff that you're going to see on TV has a debunking tone to it. So I would say to look to believers and then just have your own discernment. Listen to what the believers have to say. And then from there, take or leave whatever stories resonate or don't from it.
If we constantly talk about this kind of what's the benefit for the government to disclose this stuff to us, and we understand the benefit of the secrecy side of it because it's kind of that makes an awful lot of sense as why they would keep things secret, the control, the kind of the money side of things, and but it seems like things are turning a bit, and actually we're getting snippets of information, as you said earlier. So it's kind of for me that's that I don't quite get that because they've done a great job in the past with kind of making this seem like a crazy subject that anyone that kind of engages in this is just a bit they're not right in the head. Whereas now we've got Arrow set up at the Pentagon, we've got within the White House they discuss UAP. They might not necessarily say what it is, but they certainly say that it's something unusual. And it's kind of obviously going in that kind of direction. But there doesn't seem to be a benefit to the government to do that. And I think that's the strange thing that I don't quite get. I wonder if you kind of get a take on why they're doing that.
So for me, I think that the benefit is in actually kind of pretending that they don't know what it is, but that there's something. Because then you have this threat, and now we don't know what technology we can use. Now we need a bigger budget. And, I'm assuming, the government in the UK probably is to some degree still has similar type of things, but I don't really know exactly how it works. But in the US, there's this thing that's called like sometimes called the revolving door, or sometimes it's called the iron triangle. And basically, you kind of have three different main players. And this works with the UAP conversation, but it also works with pharmaceuticals, environmental. It works in every single major department that is in the government. And so, like what we talk about, where you have like your private sector, these are these companies that are reverse engineering this technology. We already know, and they're the ones who they have the licensing deals for every war. So these are like the private sector. They're funded, by the bureaucracy. So in this case would be the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense can't just get this money without Congress. So Congress needs to say, here's the funding, and then the funding goes into the private sector. Now, the private sector is filled with former Congress members who lobby back to their former jobs, convince them these are the dangers, this is what we need, convince them, they get the money, and then the money side. So this is why it's a revolving door, because once you work in one, you have a job in any of the three. But this is why I think they're even admitting it, because it's a new way to get $20 trillion in this private sector who already knows about this stuff. They've already had technology. There's already people, whether people believe Bob Lazar or not, there's so many people who have said about the secret information, the secret technologies. So they've already known this. The reason that they're allowing this information to go to Congress is because they want more money. Because if they were to just say, oh, it's interdimensional and pretty much none of our weapons could ever do anything to another dimension, this makes no sense. So they can't be fully honest about the interdimensional. They can't be honest that these things most likely don't want to hurt us, or they would have hurt us for the last 60 million years. They would have been doing it the whole time. And, so I feel like that's kind of where this, the benefit for them saying it finally is they just are going to get like crazy amounts of money and then still leave the question of, well, we don't know. Are they dangerous? Is it a threat to our national security?
So bearing in mind that Lou Elizondo then, for example, says he said famously now on a podcast that, if we knew what you knew, how would we feel, or something like that. And he said somber. It personally, for me, the more I've got into it, the more optimistic I feel. But what's your stance? Where's your sort of swingometer on that?
I'm in general optimistic. And especially when it comes to humanity as a whole. When it comes into individuals, I'm not always optimistic, but the wholeness of humanity and of the planet and everything that could be happening in other dimensions, I'm optimistic about it. And I think that even still, even if like this is being used for the wrong reasons, or even if there is like some element of like Project Bluebeam, where some of these things are staged or fake to control narratives, even with that, it still leads to the general public getting comfortable with this idea. So I feel like in the end, people are still going to, sorry, my headset connected and disconnected, but so it's still going to lead to people being more comfortable with the idea. So I'm optimistic, even if there is secrecy and lies and cheating and, trillions of dollars basically being stolen from the American people. Even still, I'm still pretty optimistic about it.
I like that, a bit of positivity. I'm conscious of your time, Jen. Where would, if people want to come and find you, what are your sort of socials? Where's the best place to come and find you on your social networks?
So my biggest platform is TikTok, but I'm probably more active on Instagram and YouTube. I do a weekly live. And I also have a Substack where I'm kind of delving a little bit more into kind of my personal experiences and more writing and just kind of transitioning to, because this kind of all happened by accident, really going back to more my passion of writing and going more into flow about how I'm going to be covering topics, what I'm going to be covering, what I'm going to be sharing, just letting it change and evolve over time, as opposed to kind of just, sticking to what works. I'm like, well, this is working, but I think I should change it and just be more true.
Awesome. Nice one. Well, look, thank you so much for talking to us. I really do appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again, perhaps in the future.
I would love to. Thank you so much, guys. This is wonderful. And I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.